Hey there, Internet. Little my cousin Sarah and the music playing in the background there for a bit. Um, let's just check out how that's sounding. I'm still experimenting with learning how to use the levels in OBS for my sound. Like everybody, we're just adapting here. No, I don't want that. Where's... There we go. So how's that work? Oh, good levels. Okay. All right then. So, how you all been keeping? Hey, I got a few bits of news, and I'm going to pick up where I left off last week. So, when you were last here last week, was it last week? The last 2 videos ago. I think that was technically last week. Technically. And now we're moving into the new week. And I finished off the last thing. Here it is. Hi there. It was inspired by... so one of the explicit touchstones mentioned in the request. This was a commission for an old Kickstarter. I'm catching up on a backlog of commissions right now. And this is inspired by Princess Mononoke, and then also the client's daughter is an archer, and this is for them. So I didn't want to do just like a rip off of Princess Mononoke type stuff, but I definitely went with being inspired by that and kind of the whole fantasy imagery. This guy's sort of a little spirit, ghouly thingy, transparent with sparkles in him. It's meant to be a con sketch, fairly quick. It took about maybe 2 hours, including getting up and stretching before I went back to finish up. Most of the time is on the main figure, and then a fairly quick light treatment for the location and background, just graphite for the background, kneadable eraser for the highlights. Pretty happy with how that turned out. Yeah. So, I have another one to do. I've been trying to get back into my own comics, and I'm making plans. I actually came up with a short story inspired by current events. I need to sit down and do some thumbnailing, and I need to get back and do my tones for values for the Dream Life pages that I do have inked. There's 3 of them that need to get wrapped up. And then I have to start getting into the routine of drawing more of that, because that's what I'm going to do more for the final collection. Blue for this. There we go. Oh, let's start with a sharp pencil. Oh yeah, that was reference work for illustration. I did a coloring book for a growing company. Totally legit. Commercial agent job. Where are my sketches? This is my little doodles and ideas and things. There we go. So that's what I just did. That was my first rough notes. Now I got this one. And it's Into the Spider-Verse inspired. So being aphantasic, which means I don't have a mind's eye, I sort of get ideas about things, and then I have to try to see if how it works when I try to execute them. And so that's what this rough is, just sort of working things out in very gestural doodles, trying to get posing and use of the space. And there's some ideas in there that I want to refine. And now it kind of lets me think about wider. Yeah. I don't want it to be too subtle that there's a heart in there. I was asked during my cartooning class if I would demonstrate the constructive mannequin that I used working for Marvel. But I demurred because I didn't really much at that point. I'd already transitioned to what I'm doing now, which is sort of a gestural based non-mannequin, although there's certainly figurative contour elements that I explore that relate to it, and some of my gesture marks are blocking out shapes that are mannequin adjacent. There's a shape there for the what you would call the bean, but it's meant to actually reflect a torso and hips a little more closely and gesturally. And I find this also quick, loose approach to drawing injects more energy into the line, and then the goal is to do what you can not to lose it by the time it's time to ink everything. I did go through a phase where I was studying things, doing anatomy studies and then breaking them down into constructive forms, and that's how I learned the figurative silhouettes for the various body parts. And like in my mind, without seeing a literal picture, I think about what the body part looks like at that angle in profile, and I'm able to call that up the same way I know how to write letters. I can't really explain it much better than that. I don't see letters in my head before I draw them either. Actually, I want to go all the way across this intersection. Yeah. Boing. Boing. There we go. Get rid of this misinformation. There. And there's the core rough of my sketch. Very light. You guys can barely make it out. Just a rough of what I plan to do. I think going this way. Let's go. So they both come down from here and here. Sweet. Yeah. That's a more interesting shape too. And likewise, this coming week in class, I'm going to be talking about drawing freehand, sort of curvilinear perspective. If I think about a space, so normally in this perspective, you're focusing on the horizon line and vanishing points anywhere along the horizon line and or floating in space above and below the horizon, finally for things that are not at right angles to the plane. However, this is a down shot, so my horizon's out of the frame up here anyway already. It's not that it doesn't matter, it's relevant for these edges, but I'm also going to fudge and distort and go for the semi-spherical feel for the location, not worrying about the figures too much, to suggest a curvilinear perspective without doing a lot of the math, shall we say. I'm not going to pull a ruler out. So I think about the center of my perspective, and that can move. I could decide I want to center it here, and you'll see in a second how that alters it. And then from the center of this point out, I think of the center line being vertical. And then the angle is important, but it's a curved angle. It radiates out, and say from the middle point, the next time the line passes, it'll be, about half an inch out, let's say. Just an arbitrary thing, but from the bottom, it's like an eighth of an inch, and an eighth inch up here. So the line arcs, and then it arcs like that. And then it stays about half an inch apart up here, and about an eighth of an inch there. So inherently the curve of the arc gets amplified, so that by the time it's out here, it's doing that. So around here, the side of this building is doing that line, and around here, the side of the building here is doing that line. And way back here, there's another building. So this is like an avenue with a bunch of cartoonishly tall structures lining it. That they are zooming around above. I just use the curvature created by primarily the bend of my wrist, although I am slightly cuffing my hands, which amplifies and creates a compound curve, so it's a little flatter out here and curves more tightly in the bottom eighth or so of my frame, and that helps ensure the augmentation of the kind of ovoid, in this case, curvilinear space that I'll create. So I'm going to look at the angles again. This goes this way, so this has got to radiate in a naturalistic feeling degree. Right? So I usually don't do these extra parts. I'm just doing that to illustrate to you guys. But I can ghost it. I just do this as though I was going to draw it, and then draw the part that I need. I can make use of these other lines too, so they're not entirely wasted. But, so here's my center line. You can see how that's like a very forced perspective. It's not naturalistic. They're not going to a vanishing point. In fact, somewhere around here, what I'm going to do is make the buildings shorter to avoid them getting too close to a compressed vanishing point. Distortion with the vanishing points is kind of one of the go-to games. And now I do the same thing, so I had the center line vertical here, and then I curved out. For the horizontal line, it's kind of like the horizon line, but it's just sort of the center of my structural approach to doing this curvilinear thing. That's flat, but then further out it's getting more intensely radiating. And the curve gets more arched, and you'll notice I'm lining my wrist up with the center line so that that makes that curvature geometrically sound. I can go in here and sort of ballpark in the same, just for myself. For later on, I'm doing those, and then again, if this is my center, we're going from level out to more curve out here. And I just sort of follow those angles. And that's the thing about freehand perspective. What matters isn't that your vanishing point perfectly agrees. It matters that it doesn't argue very hardly with its neighbors. When there's discord and they don't kind of get along and suggests coherence, you get an effect that our eyes are attuned to picking up, because we're used to seeing kind of something like curvilinear perspective all the time, but the reality is we don't actually see curvilinear perspective. We see bifocal curvilinear perspective. So I'm all for fudging a bit, because I can't recreate stereo on paper without getting into doing multiple drawings and all sorts of stuff that I'm not interested in fussing around with. There's apps for that. I want to draw comics. So I do things that are close enough that my human viewers will buy in. And that's the trick. You're an entertainer. You're looking to get your audience to buy in to the game they're not looking to check your work and see if you got it right. If it's really badly off, it's jarring to the eye, they're going to notice, but that's not why they're there. So don't worry about perfect. Worry about what makes the eyes happy. And sometimes with the right style, that can be quite a ways from anything like realism or perfect. Okay. Don't get too out of hand. And you see I've got my figures are very light still, and I'm putting a little more time now into setting the location. But that's just sort of part of, I shouldn't say it's not a but. This is just sort of part of a process of not rushing to start filling in anything. Like I want to fill these figures in until I've kind of confirmed my composition. And this goes back to that point I started making early on, which is that being aphantasic and so not constructing this in my mind doesn't mean I can't imagine it. It just means that it's academic in my head. It needs to be executed. And so the techniques I use help me plan it. They're not theory in the abstract sense, but I use these kinds of design techniques to very roughly think out what's possible and have a strategy. And then as I'm going, like right now, the shape of these buildings, it's really just making up as I go along. I'm keeping it very simple. Don't get too involved again. I'm just doing gross forms. I'm essentially doing constructive shapes here, but again, I'm approaching it the same way as I did the figures, which is blocking in the very simple figurative contours of them, not getting too locked into a rigid constructive mode and trying to do details of the architecture before I've even decided if I like how a thing feels one way or another. So I'm going to find that curve and extend it out to find the right feeling arch. I got some weirdness in there, but this figure nicely also overlaps that edge, so I think it's going to, as they say, hide my sins and become an entertaining part of the stagecraft that I am attempting to employ. I just have a fun idea. I'm going to have to look to see if I can find out what the client looks like. That's too big. It's too big. I don't need to see what they look like in detail, but just a general idea of, oh, kids, what are you doing? Watching. So there we go. I've now downloaded the concept I had in my head for this scene. These two young boys as superheroes. And I can start I think one of the first things I'm going to do is work on the likenesses and the bodies a bit. And work on getting them to where they need to be. So hey, there's this thing going on. There's a couple things going on that I want to mention as I'm wrapping up my rough here a little bit. I'm going to stop to think about the next stage. First, next May 1st, that's coming up next Friday, I am hosting a comic jam on Zoom. So, if you stuck to 20 minutes into this video, you're interested in drawing a lot and might enjoy a comic jam. Go to the Comic Jam website, I believe. Let me check if it is there, and if it isn't, I'm going to add. You know what, I'm just going to do that. I'm going to go to the chat right now on my channel. Where's my channel? That's it. Okay, it's not there. So, I'm going to, in the chat, jamming May 1st. Link to the website, and then I will update the description text as soon as I turn the camera off. But you can also go to salonbdmtl.spiltink.org. So spilt, SPILTINK.org. And check it out. There's a Facebook page and a mailing list. You can sign up to either one just before 6 p.m. Eastern. Is it daylight savings time? Eastern daylight savings time right now. We will be starting up the Zoom, and it'll go until midnight here. We'll hang out and draw. And what we'll do is you could just hang out and draw at your home if you wanted to, but we're going to use Aggie, AGGIE.com. Let me see if I'm remembering that correctly. I should by now. Aggie.com. Yes, AGGIE.io. Actually, not com.io. And it's a drawing app website thing. It's pretty cool. I just did a video about it, last video up. Check that out for details of how that's going to work. And we're going to hang on and draw. Just come check it out. Just come do that. I'm also thinking about other things I can do this way. Like, I had this notion about, I want to teach more. So I've got classes. I've got a student patron category for $10 a month on Patreon. And then you can show me your work and we'll form a curriculum for you to practice on your own. So that's one mode if you want to work with me as a student. You can also do a la carte. And I was thinking about courses and things. And I thought, you know what might be a good idea is just doing something along the lines of maybe once a month hosting an online version of something equivalent to a life art session, except that it could be on a particular topic like inking or page layout or something like that. And it would be a pay at what you can at the door type deal. You just have a PayPal address, and if you could pitch me $5, that'd be great. And you want to do more, that'd be good. And it'd be an hour or two of me exploring an idea, and then maybe looking at your work and giving feedback and stuff. Sort of more informal, and I'll let people explore it without committing to some sort of long-term plan just yet. That's a concept I'm considering. Would you be into that, dear watcher, listener, hand watcher? Let me know in the comments. And then the last thing I want to talk about, I'm not quite ready to announce or commit, but so there's a Canucks for Comics, hashtag Canucks for Comics, retailers right now. I wrote a long article on Sequential, so one of the first things I would suggest, if you want some context for this, I'm a little biased, there's probably other articles now you could read, but read mine. I talked to her personally to a lot of retailers in Canada about how they're handling the shutdown, and it's not a great story. Most of the article is their first-hand quotes. I pretty much left them to tell the story. I just asked questions and then tried to frame it and present it. It's a big one. It's 5,000 words, but you will understand what they're dealing with. And then I mentioned during and after it, there's various efforts, fundraising. So the Comics Legends Legal Defense Fund, there we go, CLDF, is doing a fundraiser to they've already committed 10 grand of their own, and they're organizing the generating of a fund for retailers dealing with problems due to the COVID shutdown, and then also potentially creators. It sort of depends on whether, obviously, they could generate enough funds, I would guess. But I remember reading that said that creators are eventually, as well, if they're hit hard, will be someone they look to support as well. That's kind of important because Canada's trying to do its best anyway to help out, but there are still shortfalls in people who do kind of professional but not very profitable. So you have to be over a certain size often to get a lot of these things. Freelance artists and stuff like that have a hard time getting recognition. They're working on it, but in the meantime, this is something we're doing a little more homegrown. So fans and readers are looking to help out small retailers or mid-sized retailers who are having troubles, who fit between the cracks of the system, and eventually creators likewise. So what a lot of people are doing is auctions, and you could do a commission. You could request a commission, much like I'm doing now. So this is won't get too personal, but basically both the last two have been themed around requests oriented by parents having their kids kind of cast as fictional characters, and that's a fun thing for me to do. I enjoy it. I also do other kinds of commissions. I've got a couple other on the plate that are just the person themselves, having them created as a fictional character or a vampire in one case, and I also do other fun ones. I'm actually really open to a lot of suggestions, and what I'll do is when I've cleared my plate for right now, I'm trying to get my existing commitments out of the way so I can do this without any kind of guilt. I'm going to offer open commissions on bids, and the high bidder will give their money to the CLLDF as a charitable donation, and I'll do the commission for them. So that's how I'll be helping to raise, and that's what a lot of people are doing to raise money for Canucks for Comics. Go check out the hashtag and see some of the art that's been done already. It's some pretty good, cool stuff. You can use Twitter or Facebook and check out the Canucks for Comics hashtag and see what people have done. And maybe there's an artist already in business, got their shingle out, who will take your pitch, and you can help out a little bit that way. A lot of the comic shops, there are other ways people get comics to people nowadays, so it's not the only route, but that's makes it even more important because they're a key part of local culture and keeping comics at a grassroots level alive and connected. A lot of them put a lot of time in community building and hosting events. A lot of them also enjoy crossover with gaming and other kinds of pop culture and nerd culture fostering. So their value cannot be understated, and it would be a shame if too many of them took the blow the worst way and had to shut down. I know a few already have had to, unfortunately. So anything we can do to keep that around and keep those who are hardy enough to, in theory, survive this with a little bit of help, get them that help to make sure they can make it through. We also have things planned for next year to try to get people going out to shops again. But it's a little soon to talk about that. But I've been talking with Brendan Montgomery at Sequential Magazine. So I publish Sequential the site, and our sister magazine is published by Brendan Montgomery. We've been just talking about plans for next year and things we can do to hopefully help encourage people out the door. You know what? We probably won't have to encourage them out the door. Question is, will we be able to get them to go to comic shops? And we want to make sure that they do that. So for now, let's keep them alive. Creators, Canucks for Comics. Canucks for Comics. Canucks for Comics. I'll put that in the description text as well. I'm going to end the video here and get back to work on this in the more focused part where I need to think and not be distracted by the awareness that somebody is watching me all the time. I see you. Go pledge to my Patreon and help me out, okay? Okay. Have fun. Oh, whoops, there's chats. Not this time. I am not working on Cranston Bristol. I am working on Cranston Bristol. No, for a second there, I thought I was working on a different pad. I thought I had the Fabriano out. Cranston's good. I like Strathmore. That's my favorite. But Cranston's quite good. A background that goes down and then up. It's curvilinear downshot. You will see in the next video. I'll probably flash the finished art, so I'm not sure how to interpret that question, but there you go. Okay. Excuse me. Stay safe. Wash your hands. Wear a mask outside. Make many comics. Come join me at the Montreal Comix Jam revival of the Comic Jam. I used to. So if you go to the Salon BD Montreal site, look in the chat and in the description text shortly. I used to host them in the flesh, in the real, in Montreal in the early aughts for several years, and then life got busy, and long story short, I stopped doing it for a long time, but I decided I wanted to revive it. We need it as cartoonists probably even more than ever. Just get out of our bubbles. And there are a lot of doodlers out there who probably never been to a comic jam, and this might be their first opportunity to try it out. So check out the URL, and if you're interested, go join the Facebook event or the mailing list so you'll get notifications when we start the jam, 6 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time on May the 1st. All right? It'll be like till midnight. So longish. There's some window of opportunity there if you got other plans. You can join late. That's cool. See you in the ink.